This episode is brought to you by Bleacher Report. How do you follow sports? From college football to the NBA, Bleacher Report brings you the latest news, live scores, and epic highlights from your favorite leagues, teams, and athletes, all in one app. Dive into exclusive shows hosted by your favorite athletes and original Bleacher Report series with breaking news, rumors, and predictions all season long. Download Bleacher Report to personalize your coverage.
Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. You know, one of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
We continue sharing our best and favorite episodes of 2024, and today the focus is on the Accelerate Everything series with host Dub Maddox. I had the opportunity to visit Tulsa, Oklahoma, and watch Dub and his offensive staff in action this past season. I was highly impressed with their operations on game day and how they communicated and worked together. Special thanks to Dub and Johnny Ulibari for their hospitality. Please be sure to check out Dub's site, r4football.com. He's one of the great thinkers in the game, and his R4 system can help you and your program win more games. This episode is with Brian Vaughn, the linebacker coach at West Texas A&M. This is one of my favorites of the year. We're excited to have Dub back with Accelerate Everything in 2025 as part of the Coach and Coordinator Network.
What we know about volume is this is true of unbalanced, it's true of empty, it's true of formation into boundary, it's true of compression. If your answer is we have one answer and somebody runs it 3 times in the game or 4 times in the game, then you're probably fine. But what do I do if the volume of plays isn't 4 times? What if it's 40? How do we answer that? And that's a really difficult task. The 4 versus 40 question always exists in football.
We're back for another season of Accelerate Everything, which was a tremendous season last summer. Our guest host, Dub Maddox, always does a tremendous job. So, Dub, I'm really excited that you're back again with us here for another season of Accelerate Everything.
Yeah, Keith, I'm excited. Looking forward to sharing some of this great content that we put together.
So our first one here is with a guy I think that a lot of our listeners probably are familiar with. They've, at the very least, come across some of his things that he's done on his blog, Blitzology, as well as some of the things he does on Twitter. But Brian Vaughn, he's the linebackers coach at West Texas A&M, and just a great thinker on the game, and he shared a ton here in this one that's helpful to guys, I think, on either side of the ball.
Yeah, Brian's a wealth of knowledge and always got a unique perspective on looking through the game through both sides of the ball. So it was really unpacked quite a bit of things that he's looking at right now. I'm excited to share it out.
And Dub and I will be back for some takeaways following this interview. So here's Dub's interview with Brian Vaughn, linebackers coach at West Texas A&M and creator of the blog Blitzology.
Today's guest is Brian Vaughn. Brian is the creator of the infamous Blitzology website that has been a go-to resource for thousands of coaches over the years. Brian has coached over a decade at the collegiate level. He is currently the linebackers coach at West Texas A&M University. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Brian, I've followed you through your website for what feels like the beginning of the internet, and I was so excited to finally meet you this spring when you came through our school to recruit. You're one of the brightest coaches in the game. You have a unique ability to see and articulate football scheme and strategy. When we met this spring, we had a great discussion on condensed formations, and I wanted to get you on the pod to rehash some of those things we talked about first. So let's start with the first question that I had for you when we met. What are some of the baseline issues that condensed formations present to the defense, and how do you prepare to combat them?
When we started talking about this spring, I mean, the number one most basic thing is it requires more verbiage defensively because teams are splitting at more different alignments for receivers than we've ever seen, probably at any time in my career, where you're getting the extreme Baylor, Art Briles type splits all the way down to the tightest of condensed. But even as we started to discuss condensed, what does that mean? I mean, it's a great umbrella term for a bunch of types of formations, but how condensed is it? Are they within a yard of the core? Are they 2 yards within the core? Are they 4 yards off the core? So you start to have all these terminologies that you have to have. And is it on one side of the formation? Is it on both sides of the formation? Are there tight ends involved? And where are those tight ends located relative to the receivers? And all of a sudden it becomes this huge task to just describe where are the people lined up. So we had to expand our vocabulary because we're going to have an intelligent conversation with players and coaches. We can't just say condensed and have that umbrella term apply to everything, because now there's different things happening. And in our breakdown data, our scouting report data, and also talking about the most basic fundamental of defense is lineup. Okay, well, how are we lining up if the condensed is really, really tight to the core? You line up to condensed if it's a little bit wider from the core. So the first thing it did to us was force us to really reevaluate all the terminology we're using. How do we get these people described? Where are they at in the breakdown data? Then bring that to the scouting report, bring that to the game plan. So that was the first challenge that exists. And there's definitely a big difference between a guy who's lined up 1 yard from the core and a guy who's lined up 3.5 yards from the core, because it creates new problems. So we had to figure out a way to discuss that with players intelligently and discuss it in game quickly and efficiently. And how do we describe what we're seeing? So that was the first challenge that we had to just address, was how do we name this? How do we talk about this with each other so that we could have a intelligent conversation?
I think one of the things that we were discussing from a staff standpoint, I was talking with you, is we're trying to find what's that threshold of spacing that creates the most stress for you on defense. Like you said, is it 1 yard? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? And trying to find, where's that magic number that you're really kind of in the most conflict. And it really comes down to that apex or that overhang player. What puts him in the biggest stress point to, I can compress this gap, but if you're at 3.5, it's a little bit harder to compress. Can you talk about maybe those thresholds and elaborate on that from your standpoint?
Yeah, like if the split is really tight, I mean, for most defenses, they want to edge the football. They want to go outside of that to keep it in, because whether you go and read what people are talking about when it comes to like old school wing T, for the wing T coaches out there, I don't mean wing T is just old school. There's still lots of teams running it at a high level, but they'll tell you that the big plays they get are perimeter plays. They get outside the defense and they go. And we always talk defensively. The two biggest plays in football are the number one longest runs in football are the plays that cut back. The second longest runs in football get outside of force. That's where the two longest plays running the football come from. So when you're thinking about that and somebody gives you a tight compression set within a yard of the core, you really want to leverage the formation in some way. So how are we going to leverage that? The problem is offenses are really good at the binary thinking of where is the force player aligned. If he is outside of number one, we're thinking cloud support, corner force type concepts, or even taking an outside linebacker or a nickel or a down safety or something and moving him outside. If that guy's outside, offenses are going to start think the binary terms of, okay, well, if he's outside, then we want to block him out and run the ball inside. And we'll get our fit inside and keep that guy out of the fit in some way. The other issue is that because of that split, they can block down and crack pretty effectively and get offensive linemen and pullers and stuff out on DB bodies, which again is never really the plan. And in college now, we can't cut them anymore. They're going to flag us if we cut pullers. So it's a pretty hard task to say, hey, DB, go get out there, force the football back in, set edges. Also, we need you to be able to play cloud force and stop the ball. And you need to be a lockdown man defender on an isolated X on the backside of trips. Like, who is this unicorn creature that can do all of that stuff? So that creates one problem. Who's going to be down there? Who's going to do it? How are they going to force the football? And the second that we play with outside leverage, a lot of offenses will say, okay, that's the indicator that we need to now run the ball inside, block those guys out. But the problem is if you move inside leverage or even head up, now you're potentially getting blocked down and we're giving up the second longest run in football, which is the ball getting outside of force. That ball gets out on the perimeter and things get real bad real fast. So the first thing that we have to talk about is, okay, how are we going to leverage it from outside leverage? How are we going to show some outside leverage and then cross face and come inside? Because at some point they're going to run the ball inside. So we have to show them outside leverage, get them into that second part of their thinking, which is if the force player's outside, run inside. Now we go outside and move back in, right? Whether that's stemming in or post snap playing back in across that block, we have to have some way to get back inside once we've induced them to come inside. We also have to change up who's doing it. Where's it coming from? If you watch a lot of like the NFL film of what's happening, there's a ton of like double corner pressure stuff. The teams out there that are running the Chucky concept, right? If you watch Kansas City, they brought a ton of it, compressed set, bring both corners, right? Because they're now looking at those linebackers and they're looking at the overhangs, and now the corners are pressuring off edges, things like that. Like, so you have to start thinking, how are we going to get those people involved in the run fit and change that up? Can we potentially start inside and stem outside during the cadence? So we're trying to change up all of those things, but everything gets more complicated the wider that split gets. Because, and we talked about this quite a bit, like, what is the threshold? How far do you go? Well, 1 yard, maybe you do want to be outside. Now, if it's 2, maybe you still want to be outside. But you start to get in that 3, 3.5, 4 yard range of split by the number one receiver. We talked about this, like, no defensive coach is ever going to say, hey, force player, you're allowed to get displaced in the C gap 4 yards. If a C gap defender or edge player got displaced from a 9 technique 4 yards outside in that D gap area, creating a C gap that's 4 yards wide, most defensive coordinators would lose their mind, right? Nobody's going to allow that. For us, we tell force players 2 yards of displacement is the maximum. If you feel yourself getting displaced more than 2 yards, at some point you got to play back in. You've got to do something else because you're creating the gap. The space is being created by you running out there. This is like stretch plays, right? Guys stretching me. I'm beating the reach, coach. But yeah, you're all the way on the sideline and they cut up. That doesn't really work, my guy. So as you think about that, as they start to expand that split, can we realistically play outside that guy? Well, I don't know if we can anymore. And again, there's where we have to have terms, because if the split is really tight, maybe we do want to be outside that number one receiver. But as the split gets wider, we've got to start thinking about being head up or more inside. We've also still got to stem. We've got to potentially start outside and play back in. Now we have more complication. And now when it's more reduced split that's in that 3 and 3.5, 4 yard range, we've got to start thinking more like a crack replace player, right? We're going to put a person inside leverage, and when they block us, we're going to trigger. But there's also a ton of complexity about how deep off the ball do you place it? Because the further off the ball we are, the better off we are for all the quick game passes and stuff like that. The worse off we are for the secondary support player to see that guy get blocked. Because if you can't tell he's blocking, you play coverage. So if I don't know what he's doing yet, I have to play closer to the line of scrimmage. And so now all of our angles are different. This also just workload time. The more that I move towards the line of scrimmage, the more I have to work all the drop angles that go along with moving towards the line of scrimmage. Now I've got the stuff where I started 4 or 4.5 yards off the line of scrimmage, and I have all the stuff where I'm on the line of scrimmage, which if you already have a guy that plays outside linebacker, let's say, and he plays 9 technique, he's already learned those drop angles. But if you have a nickel, he's coming up to the line and he's doing all the new drop angles that he now has to do on the line of scrimmage and off the line of scrimmage, you just doubled his workload, because he has to learn the muscle memory of how to get out there, what that looks like, how far is my drop. And the number one thing you'll see players do, they'll get up on the line of scrimmage for the first time, and the drop was supposed to be, let's say, a max drop of 12 yards. He'll only drop 7 because he's used to dropping 7 yards from that initial 4-yard alignment. So he drops 7 yards and the ball's completed behind him. And everybody goes, well, why didn't you drop deep enough? And it's like, well, I didn't drop deep enough because I'm not used to dropping like that. And so one of the ways we actually solve this is if you get on a college football field, college field markings, and you do your drops off the sideline with your toes on the sideline and drop to the bottom of the numbers, you're dropping 7 yards. So we're trying to teach the muscle memory of what does a 7-yard drop feel like, and then teach the muscle memory what does a 12-yard drop feel like, right? So get those guys accustomed to different drop depths without being able to look at a yard line. Like, just tell me, what does it feel like? How far do you think you dropped? And the kid's like, oh, I dropped 10. Well, brother, that's actually 7. So we got to reprogram here because you can't keep dropping at that depth. So we got to learn that muscle memory of just what does it feel like? How does it feel when I drop 11 yards? How does it feel when I drop 7 yards? How does it feel when I drop 15 yards? Like, you got to know. You just have to learn that, right? Players don't naturally just know, oh, I've dropped 7 yards. I know it. I can feel it. Well, that's not necessarily a thing. So we have to go through all of that process of figuring all of that stuff out and getting that equated. And when do I line up where and how do we play it? And then creating all the changeups, because what we know about volume is this is true of unbalanced. It's true of empty. It's true of formation into boundary. It's true of compression. If your answer is we have one answer and somebody runs it 3 times in the game or 4 times in the game, then you're probably fine. But what do I do if the volume of plays isn't 4 times? What if it's 40? How do we answer that? And that's a really difficult task. The 4 versus 40 question always exists in football. If they do this 4 times, we're probably okay. If they do this 40 times, how do we adjust? Because they've got an answer in there. If they're running it 40 times, they've got enough stuff, volume within their package to attack us. So do we have enough solutions? And the other thing is, as we think about breakdown data, You guys sit in your spider holes or wherever you guys game plan, the terrorists over there offensively, and you're drawing stuff up and you're looking for where are the bottlenecks on defense. And so you're like, oh, we go trips open. They've got 7 different calls that they make, and there's a lot of complexity there. I'm trying to get my quarterback coached up. I'm trying to get all my people coached up of what to do. But boy, oh boy, if I give them compressed, they're only running one thing or 2 things. That's a huge challenge defensively, because you know what they're going to do? They're going to say, well, I can bottleneck them into these calls if I get in this formation. So I'm going to get them there, and then I'm going to just go to work. And we've got all this stuff that we've been doing all summer long, all spring long, all this stuff that we've been working on. And they've only seen a little piece of it. And now we're going to come out and give them 40 plays of this stuff. What's that look like? And that's a huge challenge. And then again, how much is within each one of those splits? So another level of complexity. And that's the name of the game here, is how do you handle all of that? And that, to me, I'm just talking from a run fit perspective too. We haven't even started talking about all the pass stuff that guys are doing, but all the run fit perspective stuff, again, do you play inside and get blocked down and let the ball get to the perimeter? Do you play outside and force the ball back in and force interior runs? Do you try to stem and disguise and get to different stuff? Do you bring edge pressure? And edge pressure is a huge question mark. We talked about this while I was there. What is the angle of departure here? We have a pretty good idea what our angle should be if we go with the plan of it's really tight splits, 1 yard. We're probably coming at an edge where we're building the edge off the outside of those guys. But what happens if they get a little wider? Do I try to go inside? Do I stay outside of that and now just play off from the outside of that? Do I start outside and cross his face and knife into that area that's created inside the outside receiver? I mean, there's a lot of questions about what edge pressure should even look like when you're getting those angles. The natural answer is go wide and keep it in. That's the natural answer. But we all know if you do that, there's the potential that the ball hits in the C-gap area running on a straight line with no deviation. And a ball running in the C-gap area on a straight line with no deviation goes a long way, right? Because it's just that ball's out the gate. And so now you have to figure out, okay, well, how do we mitigate that? Do we move somebody outside? Do we get somebody into that area? And what does that look like? And so that's where you start building all your plan. And how are we going to mix up what we're doing to make sure that they can't attack the same points of attack? How can we mitigate that? But the problem is all these offenses have built it a lot like wing T. The ball can go to the perimeter. The ball can go off the C-gap. The ball can hit inside, front side. It could also have some kind of counterplay that goes back off the backside. So now all of a sudden you're talking about it's a 4 or 5 spoke package of where the run fit can be. And so you've got to understand how we're going to fit all of that and how are we going to handle all of that piece and then not let them have a clear picture of what we're doing. So then the game within a game starts. Okay, how did we take away the perimeter piece? Okay, they're going to likely go in some sort of serious thinking, right? Okay, we couldn't get to the perimeter, so now we're going to go C-gap because that's the next logical thing. If we couldn't get outside, then we must be able to get to the C-gap. Well, we couldn't get in the C-gap, we must be able to run inside or run the counterplay away. And so now all of a sudden you're going through that whole progression of what they're trying to get done. It's like, okay, well, there's a lot there. And then how big are the receivers? Are there tight end bodies involved? Where are the tight ends? Because all that stuff matters, especially when who you're going to play there. Because it's like, oh, I'd love to have this corner doing this job, but the guy they're blocking with is a tight end anyway, and he weighs 250, and he's going to kill our little corner if we try to do this. Or he's a receiver, and he's a big physical receiver. And I mean, I've seen some of the guys in Tulsa, Oklahoma high schools. There's some big receivers. There's some dudes. And so just because he's a receiver doesn't mean he's not a blocker. I mean, the 49ers prove this all the time. They get these big, thick bodies in there, and it's almost like an extra running back body or a tight end hybrid body, and they're blocking. And it's like, well, okay, they're still building pseudo 11 or pseudo 12 structural stuff. How do we fit that? Do we use a 12 type plan or do we go somewhere else? So there's a lot of thinking that goes into all of this the second they compress. And it may be completely different if they're a yard off versus if they're 3.5 yards off. It's a lot going on, unfortunately.
Dub, I was excited this offseason when I saw you came out with the art of play calling and really dives into and take a look at play calling. And I think no one else has really done this in the past in putting some educational materials out there. So something highly useful here for coaches.
Yeah, it was, something I've been working on for some time. I really felt like I needed to go deeper and have a better framework for myself as a play caller and just studying guys, what makes a good play caller. And really it starts with the analytics. And so analytics is a really popular trend and everybody's studying those. But I want to wrap my mind around, some of these analytic probabilities and how can I build it into a play calling process to help coaches just make sure they're working the probabilities in their favor. And so we put a 4.5-hour course together, and it has a 60-page workbook that goes along with it, 20 modules. And we just take you through kind of step by step to build a framework of how to package your offense into a system that allows you to play the game out before it's played, and then also making sure you're working the probabilities in your favor. So it's something that a lot of coaches have watched for the last 3-4 months that it's been out, and I've got a lot of good feedback from it. And so I think it's something, if you're out there and you're a new play caller, or maybe you're an experienced one, I think there's nuggets in there, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, that you're going to be able to walk away with and use this upcoming season. Yeah, if you could go to our website, r4footballsystem.com, it's there on our website, and then we've got a discount code that we'll share out in the show notes for you guys that are listening if you want to take part of that. And again, look forward to your feedback on that and hope it helps you this season.
Brian, you spend a lot of time looking at offensive trends in the game. What are some of the current trends that you've seen this last season that you might be preparing for this upcoming season?
I think for sure the teams that are running all of the, I think San Francisco calls it the super concept. It's the getting the tight end out to block on the screen, on the check down. I think that's a really good investment for a lot of offenses, because a lot of times they throw the check down and it doesn't gain a ton of yards. They're just dependent on the running back to make yardage after the catch. And a lot of teams are good at breaking on the ball and getting down and making a decent tackle. And so now if you can get a blocker out there, then all of a sudden you've got your deeper passes that are there to attack. If the throw's there, you take it. If not, you check it down. And when you check it down, we've got a lead blocker and it turns into more like a toss type of play. I think that's a really low investment value play to get a big payout potentially. I think that's definitely where things are headed in terms of teams looking for a way for that check down to be more effective. The other one we've seen a lot of, I think I haven't seen as much of people talking about this, but I think there's a lot of teams getting into this. The RPO world has a lot of mileage in it. There's a ton of stuff you can do. I think where teams are starting to get a little more savvy is they don't want to get into the NFL world of checking plays and calling, we're running this run play and then we're canning it or alerting it or killing it to this second run play. We want to run the same run play. So what they're doing is they're lining up, and let's say the back is weak and they're getting ready to run it and they're going to hand it to the running back. If they have a too high look in a favorable box and they can run it, they will. If they don't, they flash the back and turn it into a Q run. So the play is the same play, but the packaging is it's a handoff to the running back or it's a Q run, which is a really nice little strategy to say, okay, how are we going to handle this? It's like a good example of what I've seen teams doing is 2x2, tight end into the boundary, 2 receivers to the field, normalized formation, maybe even that tight end's Y off because a lot of teams are running that sniffer style offense, back set to the field. They're just going to run T-trap going back over there. And the reason they're running T-trap, we're seeing, and that's another trend, more center pull, more tackle pull stuff because guard pull stuff has gotten difficult with 4 eyes and also the really hard up the field 3 techniques and things like that. So it's hard for them to get the block backs with the center. So we've seen more center pull, more tackle pull. So you got a T-trap play going into the boundary and you're going to give it to the running back. And if they go too high and play quarters, the tight end is going to release and go seal the inside linebacker to that side. So he's hanging a quarter safety. He's making it very difficult. The outside receiver to the boundary can block the outside receiver or the DB, right? So he's blocking out there and you run a T-trap. The only thing that can really hurt you is the roll down safety that creates the 8th in the box backside. So now you're just reading that guy. Okay, I put it in the belly of the running back. That safety's triggering hard downhill and coming right down in a roll cover 3. I'm pulling it out of his belly. The running back is now going to go lead block and kick that dude. And we're going to run QT trap right up in behind it. So again, simple reads that allow you to be run instead of run pass. Because if we're being honest, we know that most RPOs, especially pre-snap RPOs at the high school level, hardly anybody gives you just a pass first defense and lets you run the football. So the answer is here, most of the time it's pass, right? So if you want to run, you can build that, and teams are finding ways to build that now without checking the play, without changing everything for the offensive line or the blocking or any of that stuff. And what an easy, simple strategy that is to say, hey, the thing that can hurt me is that safety rolling down to create the 8th in the box. So how are we going to stop this? And the thing is, because the play's going to the boundary, if they roll down to like a 3 buzz to the field, you still have it blocked. The guy you're leaving unblocked is the player behind the play. So if our +1 is the least threatening of all +1s, the guy away from the run, and we're running away from it. And then obviously for the quarterback, it's like if they give you any walked up look with edge pressures or any of that kind of stuff, okay, just pull the ball, run Q run, get up in there, get what yards we can, and we're okay, right? And again, for some teams, that's a strategy that makes a lot more sense than I'm going to rip that glance that I can't actually throw. Like some teams can, some teams can't, right? And so again, if you want to run the ball, run the ball. So I think that's another one that I've seen a lot of. Still seeing a ton of like 4 strong load route combinations, trying to get a fourth guy strong. One thing I would say in the ebb and flow of things is that some of these teams are getting really, really bold with the idea of free releasing and getting 4 strong in the route. That's because a lot of teams have gone to the simulated creeper style pressures. They're bringing 4 in a non-traditional way. Can we get that blocked? Okay, we can. We got more time to throw. Let's throw these a little bit more elaborate, get everybody out in the route. I would say offenses need to be ready for a little more of the cover 0 style world where some teams are going to gash you if you keep doing that. So I think as the wheel always spins back around, right, I think you'll see a little more cover 0 pressure if you continue to do that. Obviously, it's working in the NFL, right? Brian Flores has proven you can bring 6 and play 0 and go get after people. So I think that's a place where offenses probably have to be ready for. If you're going to throw more of those types of routes, okay, we're going to get a little more of the pressure concept, concepts coming at us. Big thing that I also think is going to happen is teams are responding to all the tight fronts and the 4 eyes. They're saying, hey, inside zone is really hard against this. Where should we go? We're seeing more proliferation in outside zone and counter because teams are trying to answer the alignments of people. Obviously, counter helps you solve some of the block back issues on gap schemes and get you 2 pullers opposite where you're going. Outside zone lets you run the play. Even if they have a 4-eye, hey, on the back side of the play, we'll dig him out. On the front side of the play, we'll displace him. So we're not as worried about the same issues that you have on inside zone because of the aiming points of guys. So we're seeing more of that. And the response that a lot of teams have had is to go wider. They're going more than the 9 technique style. It's much more Miami 4-3 old school days than what we saw before as a response to some of what offenses are doing. If you go back and look at what Michigan ran last year all season long, they were very 4 down. They were very much broader edges. You see that in the NFL. Obviously, they're combating the Shanahan scheme that's out there. So there's a lot of teams that are doing that same style of thinking, getting a little bit broader, playing 4 down and trying to keep the ball in, right? And so anytime that you start to see that, then the wheel is going to spin continuously, right? So the offense is going to respond. If outside zone is harder to run, if counter is harder to run, then we're going to come up with solutions to run against that. And then it just keeps going. The only thing I would say is that it's going a lot faster. So one of the things we do all the time is you check Twitter, man. Check and see what these dudes are posting. Because if there was a tight end leak, right? These dudes, like somebody ran it and then everybody was right. Everybody's got one in. We're all going to run it. Everybody's going to have the tight end blocking and then leaking out the backside. And just picking something along those lines. If you look at what's trending, you can get a pretty good idea for the teams that are going to pull from that and say, hey, we're going to try and borrow one of these really trendy plays that's happening right now that people are seeing success with. And a lot of that is a byproduct too of a lot of the defenses are borrowing from each other. And so you say, okay, well, they attacked a defense that's fairly similar to the defense we're facing. Maybe this will work against them too. Well, they're probably right because it was probably a tricky play that's hard to deal with and all that kind of stuff. The other one I think that we've seen maybe more of than ever before is more stuff that is RPO driven, where they're trying to get a guy in the flat to throw the outlet to, whether it is the same side H-back guy coming out. It's a 2-back set. And they're getting one of the running backs out to the flat. It's a receiver in motion shooting out the backside to get to the flat. And they're not throwing bubble anymore. They're throwing it to a guy who's running an arrow style route, blocking for him and throwing that guy the ball. Very triple option in its nature, right? It's a zone read with a third phase that they can throw the football to. If your force players and coverage people don't defend that, then obviously you're going to get the ball dumped in the flat repeatedly. And I think that's going to continue. I think that's a way for teams to get the ball in an RPO world where, like I said, RPOs don't make a ton of sense to me on the pre-snap level, and especially like in high school, where pre-snap, they're giving me a look that says throw the ball every play. Well, now it's just a pass play. Just call a pass, right? Just call quick game or whatever, because just throw the ball. But post-snap RPOs, that's a whole different deal. If I can now get the defense to collapse to the run game and then throw the ball in the flat for a gain of 12, I should probably do that repeatedly until they stop doing that. And in order to stop that, they're going to obviously have to cover down. And it does change your run fit mechanics. I think there's some teams out there that are just dead set that they want to traditional guard reads or some of those things. The problem is with traditional guard reads is you get in big trouble with some of this stuff coming across to the flat and you don't add a coverage player into the equation. You're going to have to answer this because they're going to say, hey, And obviously then once they've pulled you out of guard reads, now they're going to start doing stuff pulling guards that's super annoying, that like, oh, that was annoying. They pulled guards that way and shot a guy in the flat that way. And the single, probably the biggest version of that we get is teams will get in nub trips and they will run pin pull to the nub with the bash concept away. So they're running quarterback pin pull to the tight end and they're running bash to the field. And so the deal is if you read guards, you're going to go overplay the pin pull and they're going to run bash and try and circle you to the perimeter. If you read flow and try to attack the flow of the play, they're going to run quarterback pin pull back to the nub tight end and force a DB to fit that thing and force everybody to be in the right spots, create a bunch of gaps and that kind of stuff. And again, second longest runs in football are the ones that get outside force, and you've got a force play. You've got literally a perimeter run on both sides of the formation, which is a huge challenge for any defense, right? So those are some of the ones that we see that are annoying, I guess, or kind of trending. And advancements in bash has definitely been a big deal because when we first saw bash, it was just zone opposite bash. And then it became counter opposite bash. And now it's pin pull and all these other things. And then they have the quarterback trap and stuff like that looks like bash, but isn't bash. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. That's a play where you've got split flow from the backfield with the quarterback involved. And we see a ton of it because that's how they answer the heavy run fits, right? You got a lot of people in the box. We don't want to throw an RPO. We're going to run with the QB and we're going to do it by creating misdirection and getting half your defense going one way and half your defense going another way. And that's how you create the Red Sea effect, right? How do we create parts in the defense, right? Get guys going opposite directions, create seams in the middle of the field, and then you add in. Are they doing that with compression? Possibly, right? Are they also all snug down to the core? So I'd say those are the big ones.
My last question for you, when we talked about this when we visited in the spring, you've done a lot of research this offseason on the run and shoot. What are some of the elements of that offense that you would concern you from a defensive perspective? And what makes you examine that style of offense? Are you preparing for it if you see it, or is it just in case you see it?
Well, I think the reason I was preparing for it is one, route conversion routes have existed for a long time. We used to see it all the time in four verticals. It's been around in four verticals forever, right? We're going to fall out on the outside, or we're going to run benders, or we're going to have a guy run into the post in a dig. If you have middle of the field open in our four verts concept, that's been around. I mean, obviously run and shoot's been around for a long time, but we're seeing more and more teams start to incorporate all of the read route concepts into their offense. So they're throwing it in quick game, and the guy is changing and altering his route based on how we're playing them defensively. We've got the deep choice stuff where they're throwing the outside deep choices that are breaking 12 yards down the field and deciding what the route's going to be. Almost all of that goes back to the run and shoot theory stuff, right? This is all tied in. And then you look at the San Antonio Brahmas, they're running like a hybrid of it's a little bit air raid and it's a little bit of the run and shoot stuff. I think more and more teams are going to adopt that philosophically. I also think with how much guys are practicing in the summer with their teams, all the 7-on-7 and all that stuff, you get a ton of chances to practice this stuff. And if you're filming it, it's like, okay, well, we're going to coach up the reads and we're going to teach these guys how to read the coverage. And we're not just going to run a route. We're going to run a route that then converts and gives guys a chance to make the play and things like that. And I think that also helps coaches because you can't carry infinite route combinations. I know that you guys want to. I know you guys sit around scheming to do it. But some of it is we call this and we let the guy work to get open. And I think those things make tons of sense to me. I think it also puts a lot of ownership in the players' hands of letting them do something that affects their own outcome. There's agency there, right? As a player, I decided how to run this route, not because coach told me hard and fast, these are the only rules that exist. Coach gave me the agency to decide where I run. Well, I think players buy into that. And in the year 2024, players expect to have some agency in what we're doing. They want to get recruited. They want to make plays. They want to score points. The idea that they're just going to be a robot and do exactly what you tell them and no matter what happens, that's it. You know, I always joke about Roomba defense. Roomba defense is the one that it goes where you tell it, and then when it runs into something, it just smacks into it and then goes another direction, right? Well, we're not really trying to coach them that way. We want to give them the chance to have that agency to make their own choices. So I think that's a reason to do it. The second one is I love the moving of the launch point by the quarterback. I think for a lot of teams, moving the launch point Here's a Dub Maddox plug right here. One of the first videos I ever saw of you is a really old YouTube video. And I don't know, I'll have to go search and see if I can find it. You were talking about the mechanics of play action, of the hand down, looking at the hand, coming out of the play fake and all that stuff. Action passes and moving the pocket, boot, naked, sprint, it all still works. We all know it still works. We practice it all the time. It is a huge investment value defensively to get good at, and the offense is going to do it. They're going to run hitch boot and move the pocket. They're going to run run fakes and move the pocket. They're going to run pocket play action stuff. But one of the ways to stop a team from sacking you is to change the launch point. If guys are all running, and it's just like we drew it up on the lines where we do the little rush lanes for D linemen, right? And we drew those half circles. If it looks exactly like that, you're probably in trouble because them D linemen are good. And at our level, I think on average in most levels of football at this point, the athleticism advantage goes to the defensive line versus the offensive line. Playing offensive line may be the hardest job in all of football, right? Go play left tackle and win a one-on-one pass rush is hugely challenging. And there's this unbelievable speed. And if the launch point's never changing, it's easy for those guys to crank it up. They pull their shirt up and get their back flap in the wind and they get going, right? And next thing you know, like, you're in trouble. So moving that launch point makes sense. The other thing is there's a big study, like a bunch of the NFL guys are talking about extending plays beyond 2.3 seconds, right? Extending the play longer to create big plays. Patrick Mahomes is the master of this stuff. Like, oh, the play broke down and then he moved around and then he threw the ball and he got a guy open. And we've all had that, right? Defensively, it's frustrating as all get out. Offensively, everybody's happy because that guy bought time. Well, I think a lot of the secondary movement stuff, they'll drop in the run and shoot and then start sliding in the pocket and basically drifting to get to a place where they can throw the next part of a route. That makes tons of sense to me. And I think teams who are investing in that are doing a good job of creating explosive plays. And defensively, we want to take away explosive plays. So how do we stop this? Well, what do we do if they're moving the pocket? And it could be subtle movement too. It's not just sprint and half roll. It's the dude started on the launch point and now he's setting up over the guard. And if you look at the old run and shoot stuff, like we're talking way back, the original like Tiger Ellison books where he first started talking about it, they're doing tons of coordination between the quarterback's movement in the pocket and when these routes are breaking and making sure that that's all synced up. Because to me, that's probably got to be the hard. I've never coached it, so I don't know, but that seems like that's the hardest part of this deal. Because we all know you go routes on air and you throw something on quick game tempo and then defenses are rerouting receivers and I can't get the ball to that guy on time and everything's all messed up. Well, the same thing, like if you're breaking at different times and different places and all this, coordinating all that out, but the teams that are doing it, they're getting people open. So we should probably take a look at what that looks like. The other thing from Tiger Ellison is he was like the innovator of all these route combination pieces is the stuff I think a lot of people would think of. Like the run and shoot, they're thinking June Jones, they're thinking about Mouse Davis, they're thinking about those guys that run and shoot like that, like the Timmy Chang Hawaii teams that were throwing the ball, Colt Brennan, all that, throwing for 1,000,000 yards. But that type of stuff, I think it can be integrated into teams that aren't necessarily thinking they're going to throw the ball that many times. Especially if you're saying, hey, we don't throw infinite drop back. We throw a handful of drop back passes and then they convert and we think they're good against everything. So we're not carrying infinite tags. We're carrying a set of routes where they convert and we run these plays and we're really, really good at them. And that's where we go. The other reason I was reading his book was if you watched any of Arizona State this year, I think it was Arizona State, they're running lonesome polecat stuff. There's some polecat things floating around. Tiger Ellison was also the polecat innovator, and a lot of the run and shoot route conversion stuff came from the lonesome polecat structure. And so having some answers to that, because I think speaking of trends, I think there's some teams that'll jump in it, right? They have plenty of practice time. They're saying, hey, 3 plays a game, 5 plays a game, whatever. We're going to jump in polecat, force you to adjust, force you to have checks, adjustments, a plan. And we're going to run, fly sweep. We're going to run a quarterback run. We're going to run a quick screen. So low investment for them, big investment for the defense, and something that they had success doing it. And I think other teams will borrow from that, whether it's like for special play circumstances or whatever. But I could see them using that for their 4 down stuff because more and more teams are wanting to go on 4th down. So they jumping into that, trying to create an explosive play, using it to force you to burn a timeout and then give themselves more time to plan out their 4th down stuff. What are they doing with it? Are they using it on special teams? Are they saying, hey, we're going to line our punt up in lonesome polecat? So understanding how lonesome polecat works is kind of a big deal if you want to defend lonesome polecat. There's a lot of flavors of that out there. But I definitely think teams should be doing it. Really old run and shoot stuff has been modernized in a lot of ways. So if you read the books, like his old books, like Tiger Ellison books, and then you see what they were doing more in the Mouse Davis era, definitely a big advancement. And then when you see more what they were doing and the June Jones stuff in like Hawaii and SMU. There's definitely continued advancement within there. And then it's kind of blended into this new version that's got air raid and run and shoot stuff mixed together into the stuff that's more the modern era. I would say that's probably more the version you're going to get if you're going to see it. And then there's some of it that's more in like the Bryles tree, which is the deep choice. We throw the outside choice routes. And again, how much of the other elements of run and shoot do they run? It depends. I mean, that's very variable team to team and that type of stuff. And then also making post-snap reads, I think, makes sense because if you're seeing 3 high safeties, if you're seeing coverage rotation, if you're seeing a bunch of coverage guys defensively, the likelihood that you're going to call something pre-snap, run it, and they're going to be in the look that you expected them to be in is pretty poor. I don't think that that's very realistic. I mean, if you spend a bunch of your career teaching people to read out at quarterback what happens post-snap, that's what we get. The best teams in your district, the best teams in your state, the teams that you have to beat in the playoffs, I mean, they're not going to give you a static look, stay in it, and just play. They don't do that. So I think the route conversion piece makes lots of sense. If you can't, we're not going to check the play all the time. So let the players make the decision during the play, and then let's make the right choices to get open. And I think backyard football 101, right? Run where they're not. Makes sense to me.
Brian, like I said at the beginning, you're one of the smartest guys I know. Where do coaches go to keep up with you or to get more information? You've given some great stuff here today.
Yeah, hopefully guys want to follow or chat or connect or whatever. I'm on Twitter on my regular account, which is at Brian M. Vaughn, which is my work account, for WT and coaching linebackers. And then there's the at Blitzology blog, which has been around for a long time. There's a bunch of people who follow that. And I try to do my best to respond to people who send me messages. I get a decent amount of messages, and I don't post as much on there as I used to. When I was a younger coach and I had more time, it was a little easier to post lots of stuff, but it's not as easy these days. But I do still post things from time to time. And I'm actually working on something right now that I'm going to be posting here fairly soon. And also I'm pretty easy to find on the internet. Like my profile is available on the WT website. I'm not hard to find.
Brian, I appreciate what you've done for me and expanding my knowledge of the game. Thanks for coming on the pod today to help us out.
Thanks for having me, Dub.
Dub, as you said before we got into this interview, there's definitely a lot to unpack here. A ton of takeaways. I think great insights shared in this one. What did you take away from this one?
The first thing I took away, Keith, was really seeing how condensed formations can impact a defensive coach. And I really didn't understand this until I talked to Brian, but it was really about how condensed formations require more verbiage defensively and really force teams to expand their vocabulary to describe where players are lined up. And so I think that's something that I didn't understand how it impacts them. And just as looking through what these condensed formations can do, I think it's something that offensive guys need to look at more extensively just to present these problems to the defense. And when it comes down to the leverage positions, I was impacted by Brian's talk about, how those certain condensed sets based on how far the splits are between receivers can impact their apex or force players. And so that was one of the first takeaways. The other one was the run and shoot element. Brian's done a big study this offseason in the run and shoot offense and how they convert routes and talking about some of the difficulties that can present from a coverage standpoint. And I think that's something that, a lot of guys dabble in a little bit. And I think, offensive guys need to look more closely at kind of maybe going back to those run and shoot routes and just really studying how coaches and how those offensive structures set up their route conversions. And you can present a lot of problems with defensive coverage if you have that in your offense. I really like some of the trends Brian shared out. I think trends are really important and, trying to see, what are some of the things that, those innovative modern offenses are using to present problems for defenses. And I liked his T-trap play that he talked about with the RPO game. A lot of teams will do RPOs. They have a front side run and a backside read. I thought it was unique about, he was talking about, having that front side run, but kind of adding the running back as an additional blocker if the run is taken away and trying to put that front side force player in a bind. A lot of teams will run kind of the RPO glance to the front side. And instead of, reading and throwing the glance, which can be hard for some quarterbacks, just adding the back to block that guy if he triggers down hard. So again, there's a lot more there, but I thought those were some of the big three that stuck out for me. Again, this is one episode you probably want to go back and listen to multiple times and take a lot of notes. I know I did.
Yeah, definitely a lot in this one. Some great ideas shared by him. Certainly things, you get the insight into some of those things maybe that will keep defensive coordinators up at night. Certainly useful there, but just learning how they think about it too, as you said, with the terminology, some of the different ways that you can approach, our RPO world, where maybe you don't want to throw the ball. Maybe that, you want to go from a run to a run, and those things they shared, I think, are highly useful. So, as I said before, excited that we got this series going here again in the summer here, and look forward to the next several weeks.
Yeah, can't wait to share the other ones, Keith.
Thank you again for listening to the Coaching Coordinator Podcast. As I mentioned in the introduction, we'll be taking a series-based approach to the podcast in 2025, bringing you a network of coaches sharing their insight and perspective on the game. We've kicked off the sprint-based football series presented by Titan Sensors with host Tony Holler already, and you'll hear from Coach Holler every 2 weeks this year. We'll be kicking off our Think Tank series presented by Modern Football Technology in January. These will be roundtable discussions with coaches on offense, defense, and special teams topics. Our Champion Series presented by Signature Championship Rings will also be back as a year-long series in 2025. This will also be in a roundtable format with 3 state champions discussing various topics and sharing insight on what's helped their program reach a state championship caliber. Lastly, we want to hear from you, and we'll have opportunities for you to contribute in our Your Call segments throughout the year. We want you to be part of the podcast in 2025. Follow all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com and follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.